Okay, so good day everyone. So for today's session, we will be discussing Unit 1, Chapter 5 to Chapter 7. It is the introduction and the statement of the problem and the scope and the limitation and the significance of the study. So to officially begin our session, let's have our opening prayer. Okay, so thank you so much for that opening prayer. For the objectives that we have for today, we have first identifying the essential elements of the introduction and differentiate the general problem from specific problems of the research. And then lastly is compare the different types of research questions. So let's start first with the introduction. So for introduction, it is basically the problem or the problem and its background. So it's basically the beginning of your research. So the first chapter of the research paper is entitled The Problem or the Problem and its Background. So basically, we have here essential elements, introduction, statement of the problem, scope and the limitation, and the significance of the study. So researcher has to introduce the different elements of the first chapter by giving a brief description of each element. So basically, just describe what this element is all about in your introduction. So the introduction is important in establishing the cognitive setting of the research. So what are the factors? What are the things that you are studying in your research? So basically, for introduction as well, present the rationale and the background of your study and clearly indicate why it is worth studying. So basically, for your rationale, how are you going to be doing your research? And the background of your study. So again, how are you going to be doing your research? What is your process in doing your research? And then why is your research, or why are these factors, these variables, this phenomenon worth studying for? So for essential elements, we have first is rationalization of the need, or rationalization of the need to research on the problem. So again, why do we need to study the problem? Next is clarification of the important terminologies for the reader to easily understand what the research is about. So again, what are the things, the variables that you have? What are your phenomenons that you have, and their definition? These is part of your essential elements. Next is establish of the degree of seriousness of the problem which prompted the researcher to look for solutions. How important how important is your research in today's generation, or towards the people, towards education, and towards the research community? Okay. So for introduction also, we have what is the rationality of the problem, what is the setting of the problem, what is the basic literature foundation of the study, how serious is the chosen research problem, what is the general objective of the problem, and what is the overall purpose of the problem. So again, we already have it here, the introduction of the problem as the following elements. Next is so let's describe them one by one. The rationale is formulated not only by stating the reasons of the conduct, but also narrating incidences from international to local scenarios. So how did you arrive, or how did you arise from your specific factors, from your specific variables, or how are they defined internationally and locally? The setting of the problem describes the distinctive characteristics of the geographical location of the place where the study is to be conducted. So basically, where are you studying your setting, or the commonalities between your participants in their setting as well. Are they part of a specific group? Are they part of are they part of an institution? The urgency of the problem must be proven by citing statistical evidences. So there should be statistical evidences towards your research, and there should be urgency among them. Examples for this one is we have statistical evidences. Just an example, if your topic is all about teenage pregnancy, perhaps show a statistical evidence of the rate or the age bracket in which teenage pregnancy is common, or perhaps how many teenage pregnancies are documented in a year. Next is the general objective of the study, is the major task of the researcher, and is the general statement of the problem. So basically for the general objectives, what do you want to attain? What are the questions that you have in conducting the research and why you conducted the research? Next is the general purpose, is the general benefit or significance of the study. Okay, so with that, let's proceed to our statement of the problem. Okay, so statement of the problem is a decisive sentence that indicates judgment. It likewise tries to prove a point by citing examples. So for this one, for statement of the problem, also we have state the general and specific research problem, which is often referred to as the purpose of the study. Okay, so we have writing the general problem in a qualitative study. So we have here a sample pattern. So we have the purpose of this. So what type of research are you doing? What type of qualitative research are you doing? Is it narrative, phenomenological, grounded theory, ethnographic case? Is it to understand, describe, develop, discover? So use a descriptive word. And then the central phenomenon of the study, what is the most important thing, or what is the goal, or what is the variable that you really wanted to study for the participants? Who are your participants? And again, decide where is your study or your research going to be conducted. So, and at this stage in the research, we have the central phenomenon. Again, your most important variable will be generally defined as. So what is the definition or the general definition of your central phenomenon? This again can be cited through literature. So this format, the sample pattern is coming from Creswell and Clark. Okay, so this is an example. So what we'll be doing is we're going to be going back and forth between these two slides to try to compare and compare the both of them. So again, this objective of this ethnographic study. So again, we have here your type of qualitative research is to differentiate. So again, this one is to this part. And then the customs and traditions. This is your most important or the central phenomenon of the study. The participants are the locals of Zambales in the ATAS and the locals of Zambales. So we have here for participants, we have two. So it's comparing the both of them. And then enrolled in the Olongapo National High School. This is your site. Okay, let's the site. And then for the school year 2014 to 2015, in this research, so again, we have here the phenomenon, your general phenomenon, the customs and traditions are defined as their practices in the celebration of feast. So this is your general definition. So again, just to read, the objective of this ethnographic study is to differentiate the customs and traditions of the ATAS and the locals of Zambales enrolled in the Olongapo National City High School for the school year 2014-2015. In this research, the customs and traditions are defined as their practices in the celebration of feasts. Okay, so we have criteria in writing the specific questions. So first, they must be in question form, and so with that, it's clearly obvious. Next is they must define the population and the samples of the study. So who are your participants? Who are your respondents? They must identify the variables being studied. What do you want to study? So with this one, criteria and writing the specific question, let's go back to our sample. So we have here the first one, they must be in question form. Okay, next is they must define the population of the sample of the study. So from this one, the respondents are the ATAS and the locals of Zambales who are enrolled in Olongapo National City High School. And then lastly, they must identify the variables being studied. Their variables is the customs and the traditions. Okay, let's proceed. Okay, so according to Creswell and Clark in 2014, there are two types of questions. We have the first one, essential questions. These are the most general questions that can be asked. So for this one class, these are the questions that are obvious, or these questions can be broadened rather. And then we have some questions. These questions subdivide the central questions into more specific topical questions and are only limited in number. So let's proceed. Okay, let's wait for a while for the slide to move. Here. So we have here some central questions guide. So we have, what is the meaning of what does it mean to Sawyer phenomenon? So again, what is the meaning of interpersonal competencies? What does it mean to differentiate the customs and traditions of the ATES to those of the locals? What does it mean to characterize the study habits of the top 10 students of the class? Again, these are already in questions form. The one that you have, kanina, for your statement of the problem. Okay. Central questions guide. How would the participants describe your central problems? For example, how would school managers describe your interpersonal competencies? Or how would the ATES and the locals of Zambales differentiate their customs and traditions? Or how would the top 10 high school students characterize their general study habits? Other guidelines in formulating research questions. Okay, let's wait for it to move. Okay, first is the question should begin with words such as how or what and ends with a question mark. The reader should be informed of the information that will be discovered, generated, explored, identified, or described in the study. So basically, in formulating your research questions, there is already enough information to what you want to discover, or what is the purpose of your study, or what is the things that you are curious about in your study, and the questions what happened should be asked to help craft the description. Okay, let's proceed. Okay. Other guidelines in formulating. So we have the next one. The questions, what was the meaning to people of what happened, should be asked to understand the results. For this one, each and every one of your participants has their own description of what happened, has their own description of their times, have their own descriptions of their strategies. So what happened? It should always be asked to understand the result. So this is already for your result part. It will help in your results. Next is the question, what happened over time, should be asked to explore the process. So when doing a narrative of your events, or in doing the narrative of the narratives, or of the things that was shared to you by the participants, this should be a clear question, what happened over time. Okay. So we have types of research questions. So we have non-researchable questions. Basically, these are answerable by yes or no. For researchable questions, these are questions of opinions, perceptions, or policy that are raised to accumulate data. Okay, next is specification of research questions. We have factor isolating questions. What is this? Factor relating questions. What is happening here? Situation relating questions. What will happen if? Situation producing questions. How can I make it happen? So we have for factor isolating questions. What, as an example, what is the profile of school principals in terms of the following? What are the levels of competencies of school principals? For factor relating questions, these are what is the relationship of the level of performance of senior high school teachers with the OJT performance of the student enrolled in the business track of St. Paul's School of Professional Studies. So there is relating to, in the questions, there are factors relating to. Next is next is for situation relating questions. What will happen if, right? So what are the effects of computer learning assisted methods of teaching to the interest level of the sophomores in their history subject? So there is the effects and then the interest level for situation relating questions. Next is the situation producing questions. How can I make it happen? What faculty development activities can be sponsored by the PTCA to improve the performance of graduating students in the UP College Admission Test outcome? So basically, in a way, for situation producing, you're like giving a suggestion. Okay, so with that, let's proceed with the scope and the limitation and the significance of the study. So setting the scope of the study. Okay. For the scope of the study is is determined primarily by the selection of variables that the research study will focus on. For a while. So again, for the scope of the study is determined primarily by the selection of variables that the research study will focus on. Okay, let's proceed now to the next slide. So we have the definition of variable. So a variable refers to any characteristics that can have different values or traits that may vary across research participants. Examples would be age, gender, height, and weight. Attributes refers to the value assigned to a specific variable. So for example, if you have your variable is gender, the attributes is male and female. Example, if your variable is gender, age, the attribute should be perhaps a specific age group or a defined age group. We have for your height. How are you, if one of your variables of your study is the height, how are you going to be measuring the height of your study? So that's, for example, your variable is height. Is it in centimeters, meters, etc.? Weight, the same way. Okay, let's proceed. Next is we have variables. Variables have the following important characteristics. We have dependence, mutually exclusive, and exhaustive. Okay, so for dependence first, this refers to how the variable is considered in a cause and effect relationship. So we have two, the independent variable and the dependent variable. For the independent variable, these are characteristics that are changed, manipulated, or selected by the researcher. Next is for dependent variable, those that change because of changes to the independent variable. Okay. So for independent variable, it has a cause and effect relationship. So between the two of them. Next is mutually exclusive. This means that a participant or respondent cannot possess two attributes of a variable. For instance, a person cannot be both male and female. If you have your variable is age, a person cannot be part of two age group at the same time or by the same respondent. Next is exhaustive. The researcher should consider all possible attributes of a certain variable. So selecting the most relevant attribute for each variable is part of the setting of the scope and scope of the study. So basically for exhaustive, you have to exhaust all your options, all the parts of your variables. Okay, so we have kinds of variables. So we have continuous variable, discrete variable, and categorical variable. Okay, so let's start with this continuous variable. These are variables that may have an infinite number of values that may vary widely among the research participants. Examples for this one is age and weight. So basically, each and every participants differ in their age and their weight. Next is discrete variables. These variables that have specific limits to their values. Example, income, number of children, or years of employment. So no matter how rich you are, no matter what position you have at a specific job, it is if the research is all about an institution, you still have an income, you still have a specific limit to that. Next is categorical variables. For categorical variables, this cannot be expressed in numbers but are given in non-quantitative descriptive terms. So examples for this one is if you're asking for civil status, it can be defined or your attribute should be single, married, or widow. Okay, so next is the delimitation of the study. For delimitation of the study, we have various limitations that arise during the design and conduct of this study. So this include characteristics of the research design and methodology, constraint on certain aspects of the research, and the interpretation of data, to name a few. So we have possible limitations that may have arise from the research design and methodology. So we have sample size, lack of available and or reliable data. For sample size, maybe for your variable and attributes, if you want to study a certain phenomenon between males and females, dili siya balance. It's because there are perhaps more female participants rather than the male participants. Same if you go at it with age, lack of available and or reliable data. So there is not enough data to come by when it comes to your variables. Next is lack of prior studies. So there are not a lot of prior studies that is related on your research, especially in the context of local and national research. So perhaps there are not a lot of published studies out there that is common or the same in your research. Next is chosen data collected method. So chosen data collected method, this means the data, the way you collected the data, perhaps allow me to speak in vernacular. Perhaps sayop din ang imong nagamit nga method in collecting your data, and then after na lang after you conducted your study na nimo siya na realize. Next is nature of the information collected. So perhaps the nature is not really, or the way you collected the data is not really proper. It's not really how data should be collected. Or perhaps you broke something, or you've done something kind of unethical or even unethical, and you put your participants in jeopardy as well. Okay, next. Sorry. Next is possible limitations that may arise during the conduct of the study. So we have access. How accessible is your research, even the materials of your research? Time period, the time that you have with your participants, is it limited? Is it enough? The time that you conducted your study, is it in fast pace, slow pace, or do you lack time? Next is biases. Is there perhaps possible biases coming from you, coming from your participants, and coming from the research itself? And then language. Perhaps there is a language barrier when you conducted your research. For example, your questions asked during an interview session are all in English, and you have to translate it directly or during that time. And then the context of the questions that you prepared were already gone because of the translation. Or perhaps your participant is a non-native or a non-English speaker and perhaps a native speaker, or the other way around. Okay. So with that, class, for scope and delimitation, it basically includes the coverage of the study area, the subject, the research instrument, the research issues and concerns, the duration of the study, and the constraints that have direct bearing on the results of the study. So with that, let's proceed with the next one, the significance of the study. So for significance of the study, okay, so basically for significance of the study, it convinced the reader that the study has a significant benefit and contributions in relation to solve social problem, business operation, bringing a knowledge gap, improving economic and health conditions, enriching research instruments and methods. Okay, so basically, class, for your significance of the study, how important is your studies? Or perhaps the readers in the field that you have, how will your study help with your field, specific individuals, or even yourself or researchers to come? So that's for your significance of the study. Okay, so we have here part of the theoretical framework for chapter 2. We have review of related literature, review of related studies. So there's a difference between the two for review of related literature and review of related studies. For literatures, again, these are coming from books, PDFs, scholastic works. For review of related studies, these are previously studied, or these are studies or results that are near and similar to the research that you have. Conceptual and theoretical framework, hypothesis of the study, assumptions of the study, and definition of terms. We have for chapter 3, research design, respondents of the study, instrument of the study, validity and reliability, statistical treatment. So basically, until chapter 3, this will be the things that you are to do before you conduct and gather data. And then after that, you will have your presentation, analysis, and interpretation of data. Okay, let's proceed. The next is summary, conclusions, and recommendations. So summary of findings, conclusions, and recommendations. So that will be all for our Unit 1, Chapter 5, 6, and 7. And that will be all for our first unit. With that, let's have our closing prayer. Okay, thank you so much for that prayer. I do hope that you have understood something from the lesson that we have for this afternoon. Good for today rather. So good day everyone. Have a great day ahead. Goodbye.